The late afternoon sun painted the vast prairie in shades of gold and crimson, streaking the horizon with a beauty that was almost cruel in its perfection. Evelyn Carrington, widow at 30, rode her black mare along the dusty trail, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She had spent the past 6 months mourning, not just for her late husband, whose sudden death had left her with a fortune she neither wanted nor knew how to use, but for the life she had imagined and now found herself abruptly unmoored from. Her carriage had broken down 2 miles back, leaving her with only her horse and the endless wind that whipped through the tall grass. She hadn't expected to be here, stranded in the middle of nowhere. Yet here she was, wealthy but powerless, elegant but vulnerable. The once solid walls of her estate in Cedar Grove now felt like a cage in her memory. Out here, the prairie stretched endlessly, whispering of freedom but also of danger. Evelyn pulled the wide-brimmed hat tighter over her head and squinted into the distance. A plume of dust rose far off the trail. Relief, quick and sudden, surged through her. Perhaps help had come. Perhaps this journey wasn't going to end with her alone, swallowed by the prairie's vastness. She rode toward the figure, heart pounding with a mix of hope and caution. As she approached, she realized it was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, riding with a confidence that spoke of someone entirely at home in the wilderness. His features were striking: sharp cheekbones, dark, intense eyes, and hair as black as a raven's wing, falling in long waves past his shoulders. He wore leather and beads, a mixture of wealth and tribal authenticity that set him apart from any ordinary traveler. "Ma'am," he said, his voice deep, commanding yet not unkind. "You look lost." Evelyn hesitated, caught off guard. There was something unsettlingly familiar in his gaze, as if he could see not just her body but her very soul. I suppose I am," she whispered, her voice almost drowned by the prairie wind. "My carriage. It broke, and I'm far from the road. I don't know which way to go." He studied her a moment longer, and then, with a slow, deliberate smile, said, "Then follow me home." The words startled her, not for their meaning, but for the certainty behind them. There was no hesitation, no question, no negotiation, just a simple command, paired with a promise she couldn't yet understand. She glanced down at her horse, then back at him. The risk was immense. Who was he? What did he mean by home? And yet, something in her, the part that had been tired of drawing lines around herself and pretending she was untouchable, urged her to trust him. She nodded once, sharply, and allowed herself to follow. The man led her off the main trail, down a narrow path that wound through a grove of ancient oaks. The prairie's harsh openness faded into shadows and the smell of pine and earth. With each step, Evelyn felt the tension in her shoulders loosen, the cold knot in her chest beginning to unravel. "Why? Are you helping me?" she asked cautiously, breaking the silence that stretched between them like a taut rope. He didn't answer immediately, keeping his eyes forward, scanning the path. Then, without looking at her, he said, "Because some people are meant to cross your path when you need them most. And you need help." Evelyn swallowed hard. The words sounded simple, almost trite, but they carried a weight that pressed against her chest. She wanted to ask more about him, about this strange offer, but she found herself silent, drawn into the mystery of this man who seemed to belong to the land in a way she never could dot. As the first stars began to shimmer above the prairie, she glimpsed what he meant by home. A sprawling estate appeared, blending both rustic and opulent elements: stone walls, warm lights glowing in the windows, and an air of wealth tempered by a grounded, natural authenticity. It was unlike any home she had seen, and unlike anything she had imagined for herself. The man stopped, turning to her with a steady gaze. "This is where I live. But more importantly," he said softly, This is where you are safe for now. Come in, and we'll see where your path leads next." For the first time in months, Evelyn felt a flicker of hope, tinged with curiosity and a faint thrill of danger. She dismounted, brushing the dust from her skirts, and stepped forward into a story that had only just begun, one that would change everything she thought she knew about herself and about the world she had once thought so predictable. The heavy wooden gates of Kaelen's estate swung open with a soft creak, revealing a courtyard bathed in the dying light of sunset. Evelyn's boots clicked softly against the stone as she followed Kaelen inside, her senses overwhelmed by the strange mixture of wild and refined elements. The air smelled of pine, leather, and something faintly floral, a fragrance she couldn't place, yet found oddly comforting. Kaelen moved with the silent grace of someone accustomed to commanding both land and people, his dark eyes always flicking toward her, measuring, assessing, guarding. Despite his imposing presence, there was an undeniable warmth in his gaze, a subtle invitation to trust that clashed with every instinct she had honed over years of independence and careful control. You live out here alone?" Evelyn asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and cautious admiration. Her eyes swept over the sprawling estate stone buildings interconnected with wood, gardens bordered by wildflowers, and stables where horses stamped and whinnied softly. There was wealth here, yes, but not the showy kind she was used to. This was the wealth of someone rooted, someone connected to the land. Kaelen nodded, muscles shifting under his leather vest as he stepped aside for her to enter the main hall. "I live where I choose. The prairie and the mountains belong to those who respect them." He glanced at her with a hint of a smile. "And tonight, the house belongs to both of us." Evelyn's heart fluttered, partly from the tension of being in the presence of a man who exuded both danger and authority, and partly from the odd feeling of relief. She had spent months wandering in a haze of grief and wealth, uncertain of how to occupy her days. And now she found herself guided by someone who seemed to understand both the harshness of the land and the softness of human need. Kaelen gestured toward a pair of chairs by a roaring hearth, where flames danced and crackled. "Sit, you must be tired." Evelyn lowered herself gracefully, though her hands betrayed a slight tremor as they rested in her lap. I didn't expect," she began, then stopped, unsure how to phrase the whirlwind of emotions and questions churning inside her. "You didn't expect someone to care?" Kaelen's voice was calm, yet there was an edge to it that made her flinch slightly. He leaned against the mantel, arms crossed, dark hair catching the firelight. "Or perhaps you didn't expect the prairie to have rules you can't control." Evelyn studied him, realizing he was right. She had controlled everything in her life, from her late husband's affairs to her estate, even the image she presented to society. Yet here, under Kaelen's gaze, she felt small, exposed, and curiously liberated. "I suppose I'm not used to being guided," she admitted softly. Kaelen stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Guidance isn't the same as control. I won't tell you how to live your life, Evelyn, but I can offer something rarer than wealth, choice and safety. And perhaps a path forward." Her breath caught. It was strange to hear someone speak so plainly about what mattered, stripping away all the formalities she had relied on for protection. She had been rich, yes, but her life had been hollow. Here, with this mysterious man, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Kaelen moved to the window and looked out over the estate, the fading light painting the prairie in fiery shades. "This land, it can teach you a lot if you're willing to listen," he said. "It will test you. It will push you. But if you pay attention, it gives more than it takes." Evelyn followed his gaze, imagining the expanse under a morning sky, imagining herself walking freely across the hills and valleys. A strange hope rose within her. Perhaps she could belong here, even if just for a moment. Kaelen finally turned, stepping back into the firelight. "Rest now," he said, his tone firm yet gentle. "Tomorrow I will show you the land, its people, and the life you could have here. For tonight, just be." Evelyn nodded, a smile tugging at her lips despite the lingering shadows of her past. As she settled into the chair, watching the fire flicker, she realized something she hadn't admitted in months. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt alive. And somewhere deep in the quiet of that vast estate, Kaelen watched her with a similar realization. This encounter, this unexpected crossing of paths, was no accident. The prairie had a way of bringing the lost to those who could guide them. And tonight, both of them were caught in its mysterious pull, their lives about to change in ways neither could yet imagine. The prairie morning was sharp and crisp, the air carrying the scent of dew and earth. Evelyn awoke in the guest room of Kaelen's estate, the sounds of horses stamping and distant birds calling blending into a symphony of life she had almost forgotten existed. She dressed quietly, her mind racing with questions she hadn't yet dared to voice, questions about Kaelen, about the strange estate, and about why she felt so inexplicably drawn to this mysterious man. Kaelen awaited her in the courtyard, his dark hair catching the first rays of sunlight, muscles tensed in readiness, and eyes scanning the horizon as if he could read the wind itself. He was a living embodiment of the land, strong, untamed, and profoundly present. Yet when he turned to her, a softness touched his gaze, an invitation to step beyond fear and formality. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady, carrying a weight that commanded attention yet invited trust. "The land is waiting, and so are the stories it holds." Evelyn took a deep breath, trying to summon her courage. "Stories?" she asked. "I only know of my own, and it's full of loss." Kaelen gestured toward the rolling hills beyond the estate. "The past shapes us, but it doesn't have to define us. I can show you the land, Evelyn, and perhaps in seeing its secrets, you'll see parts of yourself you thought were gone." They rode side by side, Evelyn on her black mare and Kaelen on a magnificent chestnut stallion. The wind tugged at her hair, brushing her cheeks, carrying with it a sense of freedom that had been foreign for months. The prairie stretched endlessly, each hill and valley holding whispers of a time when men and women lived in rhythm with the earth. Kaelen rode with effortless command, guiding her through paths hidden from ordinary travelers, places that seemed untouched by time. After a long ride, they reached a secluded canyon, its rocky walls casting dramatic shadows across the floor. Kaelen dismounted and offered her his hand. "This is one of the places I come when I need clarity. It has taught me more than any wealth or title ever could." Evelyn accepted his hand, stepping onto solid ground beside him. The wind whipped around them, carrying a scent of sage and pine, a fragrance that felt both wild and grounding. She glanced at Kaelen, studying the contours of his face, the strength in his shoulders, the firelight of yesterday's hearth reflected in his dark eyes. There was something untold there, a story that had yet to surface. You don't talk much about yourself," she said carefully. "About why you built this estate, why you're here." Kaelen's gaze softened, but a shadow crossed his face, one that mirrored the canyon's jagged cliffs. "I wasn't always like this," he began. "I wasn't always in control. My wealth, my land. It's taken decades to earn, and not without cost. There are enemies, debts, and rivalries that linger, people who would take it all if they could." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. Danger, hidden beneath the calm exterior, made her pulse quicken. "Enemies?" she whispered. "Yes," Kaelen admitted. "But I've survived because I know the land, because I understand people, and because I protect what matters most, including those I care for." His eyes met hers directly, and for a moment she felt the weight of his words not as a threat, but as an unspoken promise. Evelyn swallowed hard, feeling a mixture of awe and fear. "And where do I fit in that?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the wind. Kaelen stepped closer, the muscles of his chest flexing beneath the rising sun. "You've already begun to fit in by trusting me, by showing up here, by riding these hills. You're part of this now, whether you realize it or not." She looked at him, the mystery of the man and the estate intertwining with her own longing for purpose and belonging. She had been rich in material wealth, but poor in experiences that truly mattered. Here, with Kaelen and the prairie stretching endlessly, she felt the possibility of living fully for the first time since her husband's death. They spent the day traversing hidden valleys, crossing streams, and climbing rocky outcrops, Kaelen teaching her how to read the land, how to anticipate its moods and challenges. As evening approached, Evelyn realized that the man she had met in the dust of the trail had become a guide, a protector, and perhaps something far more, an unspoken connection that defied explanation. When they returned to the estate, Evelyn dismounted and watched Kaelen from the steps, feeling a strange certainty in the midst of uncertainty. She was still lost in many ways, but she knew one thing for sure. Whatever secrets Kaelen held, whatever dangers lurked in the shadows of his past, she was no longer running from life. She was ready to face it alongside him, wherever that path might lead. And somewhere in the quiet of the estate, Kaelen watched her with a protective vigilance, knowing that the winds of change had begun to stir and that the next chapter of both their lives would bring trials, revelations, and intensity neither could yet imagine. The evening sky over Kaelen's estate burned with shades of amber and violet, casting long shadows across the grounds. Evelyn lingered near the stables, brushing down her black mare after the day's ride, her thoughts tangled between curiosity, fear, and the strange thrill of being somewhere so wild, so alive. Kaelen's presence had become a constant hum in the background of her mind, an unrelenting reminder that she had entered a world unlike the one she had known. Kaelen approached quietly, his bare chest gleaming in the fading light, muscles shifting with every step, long black hair catching the sun's last rays. He carried the air of someone accustomed to commanding both land and attention. Evelyn straightened instinctively, feeling the familiar pull of his gaze. "There's something I need to tell you," Kaelen said, his tone low, serious. "Something you should know about this land, and about the people who would see it taken from me." Evelyn's heart quickened. "Enemies?" she asked, recalling his words from the canyon. "You mean those who would hurt you, or hurt anyone who's with you?" Kaelen nodded slowly. "Both. There are men ruthless, greedy, who would stop at nothing to claim this land. My wealth, my influence, it has made me a target. And now, anyone who trusts me, anyone who chooses to be here, becomes part of that danger." Evelyn swallowed hard. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Yet her pulse raced as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff. "And you? You ready to face them?" Kaelen's eyes darkened, reflecting the last of the sun's fiery glow. "I have no choice. This land is part of me, as much as I am part of it, and I will not let it fall into the hands of those who would destroy it." He paused, studying her carefully. "But there's another truth you must understand. I cannot protect you entirely. Not from yourself, not from the choices you might make." Evelyn's breath caught. His words were cryptic, yet they resonated deeply. She had spent years wrapped in control, in the illusion that wealth and status could shield her from harm. Here, she realized, there were no such protections, only raw life, decisions, and consequences. I'm not sure I understand," she admitted softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I came here because I felt lost, and you offered me safety. But now you speak of danger, of enemies, of choices." Kaelen stepped closer, lowering his voice. Safety is never absolute, Evelyn. You can be wealthy, clever, strong, but life has a way of testing the heart. I can guide you, show you the land, and offer protection, but in the end, your courage and your decisions will define you. Evelyn studied him, feeling both the weight and the honesty of his words. She realized he was not just a man of strength and wealth. He was a man who had faced his own shadows and survived, carving out a life on his terms. And in that truth, she found something startling, a hope she hadn't dared to feel in months. As darkness fell, Kaelen led her into the main hall, where a fire roared and candles flickered, casting golden light over the rustic elegance of the estate. The shadows danced on the walls, echoing the tension that had grown between them over the past days, an unspoken pull, a magnetic thread neither could fully resist. "Tomorrow," Kaelen said, his tone softer now, almost intimate, "I will show you the lands I protect, the people I trust, and the secrets that make this place worth defending. But tonight, you must rest. The challenges ahead, they will demand all of your focus and courage." Evelyn nodded, her gaze lingering on him as she moved toward the guest room. For a brief moment, she imagined a life beside this man, far from the trappings of wealth she had known, yet richer in freedom, trust, and possibility than any life she could have imagined in Cedar Grove. Later, as she lay awake, the wind sighing through the open window, Evelyn reflected on Kaelen's words. Danger was real, and yet so was the chance to live fully, to reclaim a part of herself she had lost in mourning. And somewhere in the quiet of the estate, Kaelen patrolled the grounds, alert, vigilant, and quietly protective, knowing that the presence of Evelyn had changed the rhythm of his life in ways he hadn't expected. The night was long, filled with whispers of the past and hints of battles yet to come. Yet as Evelyn drifted into sleep, she carried with her the first spark of something she hadn't felt in years, hope. And with hope, the courage to face both the land's secrets and the storm of enemies lurking beyond its borders. The morning was heavy with an unusual stillness, the prairie air thick with the promise of change. Evelyn stood near the edge of the estate's sprawling gardens, watching the sun rise over the distant hills, painting them in soft shades of pink and gold. Yet the serenity of the scene did little to calm the unease coiling in her chest. Kaelen had warned her of danger, of men who would stop at nothing to claim his land, and now, every whisper of wind through the tall grasses seemed laden with threat. Kaelen appeared from the shadows of the stables, his muscular form silhouetted against the rising sun. Shirtless, adorned with tribal jewelry and feathers, he exuded both raw power and calm control. The intensity in his dark eyes met hers instantly, a silent acknowledgment of the tension neither needed to speak aloud. "They're close," Kaelen said, his voice low, carrying both warning and resolve. "I can feel it. Outsiders moving through the canyon last night, scouts or thieves. It's only a matter of time before they test the estate's defenses." Evelyn's pulse quickened. Fear was natural, she knew, but beneath it lay something sharper, determination. "Then we prepare," she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I don't want to sit here waiting. I want to do something, anything to help." Kaelen studied her carefully, his gaze lingering on her face. There was admiration there, mingled with concern. "You are brave," he said slowly, "but this isn't a battle of courage alone. It's strategy, timing, and understanding the land better than anyone else. I'll teach you, but you must stay close. One mistake could be fatal." They spent the morning walking the property, Kaelen pointing out vantage points, hidden paths, and natural barriers. Evelyn absorbed every word, her mind racing as she imagined ways to help, ways to contribute rather than remain a passive observer. By noon, the wind had picked up, rustling through the tall grasses like a living warning. "You must understand something," Kaelen said, his voice dropping as he led her toward a rocky outcrop. "The men who threaten this land are not ordinary. They've waited, watched, and planned. They will exploit weakness wherever they see it. That includes anyone they think is a liability or a distraction." His eyes met hers, piercing and steady. "You cannot be either." Evelyn's heart skipped. The words were harsh, yet they carried an honesty she hadn't expected. She had always relied on wealth and social standing as shields, but here, on the prairie, in the shadow of danger, those defenses meant nothing. What mattered was courage, intuition, and trust in Kaelen. As the afternoon wore on, Kaelen taught her how to move quietly across the terrain, how to read tracks in the dirt, how to listen for the faintest sign of intrusion. Evelyn followed his instructions with determination, feeling her confidence grow with each passing hour. It was exhausting, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. By evening, they returned to the estate, the golden light of sunset casting long shadows across the land. Kaelen dismounted first, turning to help Evelyn with her mar. "You've learned quickly," he said with a rare smile. "And yet, the real test comes soon. Are you ready to face it?" Evelyn met his gaze, feeling a mixture of fear and exhilaration. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, "but I know I won't turn away." A sudden gust of wind carried with it a distant, sharp sound, the unmistakable echo of hooves on hard earth far beyond the estate gates. Kaelen's eyes narrowed. "They've found the trail," he muttered. "Tonight, everything changes." Evelyn felt a thrill of fear and anticipation. Her world, once orderly and safe, was now alive with danger, adrenaline, and uncertainty. She realized that the life she had led in Cedar Grove, sheltered and predictable, could never have prepared her for this. Yet the thought did not terrify her, it exhilarated her. Kaelen placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Stay close to me," he said, his voice steady and commanding. "Trust in what we've built here and in what you've learned. The prairie will guide us if we listen. But tonight, we must be ready for anything." As the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows deepened across the estate, Evelyn felt a strange certainty. She had entered Kaelen's world as a lost widow, unsure and frightened. But now she was no longer lost. She was awake, alert, and fiercely alive, standing beside a man whose strength and resolve matched the land itself. Somewhere beyond the hills, the threat was closing in, but Evelyn didn't flinch. She was ready to face it, and she knew Kaelen would be there, the fierce Apache warrior who had become both her protector and her guide through the unknown. The night had settled over the prairie like a thick velvet cloak. Stars glimmered faintly through a blanket of clouds, and the wind whispered through the tall grasses with an eerie foreboding. Evelyn stood at the edge of the estate's outer walls, her heart pounding as she listened to the faint rustle of the leaves and the distant, rhythmic pounding of hooves. Kaelen's presence beside her was a steady anchor, his muscular form silhouetted in the moonlight, long black hair flowing and adorned with tribal jewelry that gleamed faintly in the shadows. "They're close," Kaelen muttered, his voice calm but sharp, cutting through the night like a blade. "I can feel their intent. The men who come for this land do not hesitate, and they do not forgive." Evelyn swallowed hard, gripping the railing of the stone wall. "How many?" she asked, her voice trembling just slightly. Fear and adrenaline tangled together inside her. Kaelen's dark eyes narrowed. "Enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be unbeatable. Stay close. Trust in the land and trust in me." A distant shout broke the night silence, carried by the wind. Evelyn's breath caught. Hooves thundered closer, and shadows flickered across the prairie beyond the walls. The attackers had arrived. Kaelen moved like a predator, every muscle taut and ready, yet his eyes flicked toward Evelyn with a protective intensity. "Inside," he ordered, and they moved quickly to the main hall. Evelyn's legs felt like lead, but she obeyed, stepping inside the warm, fire-lit room where the stone hearth cast flickering shadows across the walls. Kaelen stood near the entrance, scanning the darkness beyond the doors and windows, his bare chest taut, tribal jewelry reflecting the flickering light. The first riders appeared over the hill, dark silhouettes against the moonlit prairie. Kaelen's eyes followed each one with deadly precision. They think the estate is defenseless. They've underestimated us. His voice was a growl, low and dangerous. Evelyn felt a surge of admiration mixed with fear. The man who had seemed untouchable in his calm strength now became a warrior in full command, and the sight of him filled her with both awe and something warmer, something that made her pulse race. Kaelen's hand brushed hers for a brief moment as he passed. "Stay behind me. Watch, learn, and survive." The attackers rode closer, shouting and brandishing torches, their intent clear. Kaelen moved to the outer gate, stepping into the moonlight, and let out a commanding call that echoed across the prairie. Some of the riders faltered, startled by the sheer force of his presence. Kaelen's voice carried authority, every word deliberate, every movement controlled. Evelyn watched as he met the riders head-on, his strategy unfolding with uncanny precision. He guided the estate's defenders, positioning them along hidden paths and behind barricades, turning the land itself into a weapon. Each move he made was measured, as if he and the prairie were one entity, a force of nature against intruders who thought to take what was not theirs. Yet amidst the chaos, Evelyn saw the vulnerability Kaelen rarely let others glimpse, the weight of responsibility in his eyes, the fierce protection he felt for her, for the estate, for everything he had built. She realized that this man, whom she had first followed out of curiosity and uncertainty, was bound by honor, loyalty, and a fierce, unyielding code. Hours passed like minutes as the riders tested their defenses. Kaelen moved with unmatched skill, turning the tide with a combination of strength, strategy, and intimate knowledge of the land. Evelyn assisted where she could, guiding the defenders and observing, learning to trust not only his strength but his wisdom. By the time the moon began to dip behind the distant hills, the attackers had retreated, their shadows disappearing into the night. The estate stood unscathed, thanks to Kaelen's leadership and the land itself, which seemed to rise in defense of its master. Evelyn leaned against the railing, exhausted but exhilarated. Kaelen joined her, his chest heaving slightly, his dark eyes softened by relief. "They will return," he said quietly, almost to himself. "But tonight, we survived, together." Evelyn met his gaze, her own fear replaced by admiration and something deeper, a connection forged in the fires of danger, trust, and shared survival. "Together," she echoed, the word carrying more weight than she had expected. Kaelen's hand found hers, fingers wrapping around hers with a protective strength that sent a shiver through her. For the first time since her loss, Evelyn felt truly alive, not just safe, but part of something larger than herself. And in that moment, beneath the endless prairie sky, they both understood that their fates were now irrevocably intertwined. The dawn broke slowly over the prairie, soft light spilling across the land like a promise. Evelyn stood at the edge of the estate, watching the golden rays illuminate every hill and valley, feeling the weight of the night's events settle in her chest. Her body ached from the adrenaline and exertion of the previous evening. Yet her heart thumped with a new energy, a mix of relief, exhilaration, and an unspoken connection that had grown between her and Kaelen over these past days. Kaelen emerged from the shadows of the main hall, his muscular form silhouetted against the rising sun. Shirtless, adorned with his tribal jewelry, he carried an air of calm authority that had only deepened through the trials of the night. His dark eyes met hers, a faint smile touching his lips, and in that moment, the past dangers seemed distant, Yet the bond they had forged remained vivid and unbreakable. "You did well last night," Kaelen said, his voice deep and steady. "Not just in following instructions, but in understanding the land and trusting yourself. You've changed." Evelyn's lips curved into a small smile, her breath catching slightly. "And you? You didn't have to let me see it. The danger, the strategy. You could have kept me safe, hidden away." Kaelen shook his head slowly. "I needed you there, not just as an observer, but as someone who could stand beside me. Strength isn't just muscle, it's heart, intuition, courage. You have all three." His eyes softened, dark intensity giving way to something warmer. "And tonight, when the world was against us, you proved it." Evelyn felt a warmth rise in her chest that had nothing to do with the prairie sun. She had come to this place lost, broken by grief and uncertainty, seeking only safety. Yet here, on this land ruled by a man both fierce and principled, she had found something she had long believed impossible: purpose, connection, and a sense of belonging. Kaelen extended his hand, the gesture simple yet laden with meaning. "Come with me," he said, "not because you are lost anymore, but because this is your home now, if you choose it." Evelyn hesitated only for a heartbeat before placing her hand in his. The sensation was electric solid, steady, and protective. "Home," she whispered, tasting the word like a promise she had been too afraid to imagine. They walked together through the estate, past the stables and gardens now touched with the morning glow. Every corner of the land spoke of Kaelen's life and struggles, his victories and sacrifices. Evelyn realized she was seeing not just wealth and power, but a life carved from resilience, courage, and unwavering dedication. And in this life, she felt herself stepping into a place she could finally claim as her own. Later, in the warmth of the main hall, they stood by the roaring hearth, watching the firelight dance across the walls. The night's battles had been survived, the threats confronted, and the land remained in Kaelen's hands. But more importantly, something indefinable had settled between them, a bond that had been forged in danger, strengthened by trust, and now solidified by choice. Evelyn turned to him, her voice quiet but certain. "I came here lost. I thought I would just find safety. But I found more. I found courage, a sense of life, and you." Kaelen's lips curved into a rare, genuine smile. "And I found someone who chose to face the unknown, who trusted not just me, but herself. That is rarer than any treasure, Evelyn." They stood in silence for a long moment, letting the enormity of the morning and the night behind them sink in. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly, a symbol of freedom, challenge, and infinite possibility. Inside, in the warmth of the hearth, Evelyn realized that the fears that had once defined her were gone. She was no longer the widow wandering aimlessly. She was a part of this land, this life, and this man who had brought her into it. Kaelen's hand found hers again, a gentle squeeze, a silent vow. "This is only the beginning," he said softly. "The prairie, this home, and us. There will always be challenges, but together we are stronger than any storm." Evelyn nodded, feeling a profound sense of peace and certainty she had not known in years. For the first time, she understood what it meant to be truly alive, truly connected, and truly at home. As the sun climbed higher, painting the prairie in blazing gold, Evelyn and Kaelen stood together on the balcony of the estate, looking out over the land. The night's shadows had vanished, leaving only light, hope, and the promise of a life built together fierce, untamed, and unforgettable. And in that moment, Evelyn knew she was exactly where she belonged.